Attendees are in listen-only mode.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you everyone for joining us. It's a pleasure that we will be able to do this today in a very important subject matter. My name is Biniam Dawit Mazmur. I currently serve as the chair of the African Committee of Experts on the Rights and Welfare of the Child at the African Union. We have a number of presenters that are lined up. The people who will be presenting, they've already been communicated in terms of how much time they have for the presentations. I have been asked to take about maximum of 10 minutes and to say a few words to provide an overview of the African Charter on the Rights and Welfare of the Child, which is obviously the regional instrument that we have on the African continent. The African Union is the custodian of the document, and in fact, it's the only regional comprehensive child rights document that exists in the world. It's not a situation that we have in Europe or in the Americas and so forth, that we have a separate child rights specific comprehensive document focusing on children's rights. This is the only one on the continent. Now, there are a number of reasons why in the late 1980s, the African Union decided to start the process of drafting a regional document focusing on children's rights. The main thinking is to actually support and complement the Convention on the Rights of the Child. So at the outset, I should mention that the relationship between the Charter and the Convention on the Rights of the Child is actually a complementary one, and it's not a competitive one. And during the drafting of the Convention on the Rights of the Child, there were some indications that there were some concerns that African countries were not able to participate as much as they wanted to because of a number of reasons. There were also indications that a number of issues that African countries would have liked to have reflected in the Convention on the Rights of the Child did not get the necessary attention. Some of these issues relate to the definition of a child being absolute to the age 18, the issue of the girl child, children living under apartheid is the other one, children that are imprisoned with their parents, particularly with their mothers, is the other. Using children in the form of begging was also an issue that has been flagged as an issue that the African Charter on the Rights and Welfare of the Child brings as an added value to the Convention on the Rights of the Child. So the Charter was adopted in 1990. It came into force in 1999. Currently, we have 48 state parties to the African Charter, the last country being the Central African Republic. We currently have few countries that remain to ratify, such as Tunisia, Sahrawi Republic, South Sudan, Somalia, and so forth, DRC, and so forth. Of course, the African Committee of Experts is currently working to get those countries on board. Now, having said that, 48 is actually a good number to work with. The largest majority of African countries are already state parties to the African Charter. So as a committee, we believe that we have a very solid ground that we work on. Now, if you look at the substantive provisions of the Charter, it combines both civil and political rights and economic, social, and cultural rights. Going a little bit further, one of the peculiarities of the Charter is the fact that it has a section, particularly Article 31, which talks about the responsibilities of the child. One of the additional peculiarity that I would like to mention, it might not appear as being substantive, but it's important. Article 1 is the provision that actually provides for the obligations that states have under the Charter. It is entitled Obligations of States. So it says member states of the Organization of African Unity, parties to the present Charter, shall recognize the rights, freedoms, and duties enshrined in this Charter. So it doesn't have a but, it doesn't have an if. The obligation that is not something that comes in Article 4 or Article 15 further down the line. It's something that is outlined up front. One of the positive things that Article 1 also does is that it provides for what we often call the conducive environment provision. It says nothing in the Charter shall affect any provisions that are more conducive to the realization of the rights and welfare of the child contained in the law of a state party or in any other international convention or agreement. It means that if a state is a party to the Convention on the Rights of the Child and the Convention on the Rights of the Child provides better conducive environments for that specific issue, then the Charter would actually support that provision within the Convention. Or if there is a domestic legislation in a country that provides for a more conducive, more better protection for children and their rights, then the Charter actually supports that environment. So it's not in a competition, it actually supports higher standards. Now, in relation to the conversation that we're having today, which is on child marriage, which is a very critical issue, as all of you would know, Article 1.3 of the Charter says that any custom, tradition, culture, or religious practice that is inconsistent with the rights, duties, and obligations contained in the present Charter shall, to the extent of such inconsistency, be discouraged. Now, it's encouraging to actually note that the drafters of the Charter, because there were some negative perceptions that the African continent wants to have its own instruments, maybe because it wants to accommodate some harmful practices and so forth, so forth. But in reality, the African Charter is actually much more stronger in trying to address and prevent harmful practices such as child marriage, FGM, and or any other harmful practice that one can think of, as compared to any other international instrument or any regional instrument. But of course, internationally, it's much more stronger than what is provided for in the Convention on the Rights of the Child. Now, there have been some concerns that Article 1 talks about such inconsistency needs to be discouraged. But honestly speaking, when you come to Article 21 of the African Charter itself, which is entitled Protection Against Harmful Social and Cultural Practices, the obligation that is provided for in there is not as weak as discouragement. It actually says that states shall take appropriate measures to eliminate harmful social and cultural practices. That's what it says. So the specific provision focusing on harmful practices is actually much more stronger than the general provision, that sub-provision that is provided under Article 1 of the Convention. Now, because the Charter defines a child under Article 2 as a person below the age of 18, it doesn't have a but, it doesn't have an if. It says, for the purpose of this Charter, a child means every human being below the age of 18 years. So if a country actually has in national jurisdiction legislation, policy whatsoever, that provides for the definition of a child in some exceptional circumstances to be lower than 18, then that would constitute a very clear violation of the provisions of the Charter. Some of you probably know that the Constitution of Malawi, for instance, had a provision that defined a child below the age of 18, and the African Committee of Experts actually found that to be not in compliance with Article 2, and we're happy to report that the government of Malawi subsequently amended its constitution so that the definition of a child is provided as 18. Some of the other provisions on best interests, non-discrimination, the right to life, survival and development, they also have very direct implications for a whole range of children's rights related issues, but also for the conversation that we are having today on child marriages. Now, I want to come to a few additional provisions that the Charter provides for. The one on education is extremely important. It's an issue that is also directly linked to the issue of child marriages. It has provisions that support the girl child. For instance, it talks about the need to take special measures in respect of female gifted and disadvantaged children. It also has a specific provision that talks about taking measures to encourage regular attendance at schools and the reduction of dropout rates, but also specifically for girls who actually fall pregnant, sometimes as a result of child marriage, so that they can continue with the education that they are entitled to under Article 11 of the African Charter on the Rights and Welfare of the Child. Some of you probably know what is unfortunately unfolding in Tanzania, where children who fall pregnant are actually being, with a policy from some of the leadership in Tanzania, are being excluded from accessing education because of their pregnancy. Those circumstances clearly constitute a violation of Article 11 of the African Charter on the Rights and Welfare of the Child. Article 14, for instance, on health and health services, is also a very solid article. It talks about reduction of infant and child mortality, the need to ensure the provision of adequate nutrition and safe drinking water, issues pertaining to stunting, malnutrition, wasting, malaria, the #1 killers in the world that still continue to kill thousands of children a day, pneumonia, wasting, malaria, and so forth, are obviously issues that should be covered within Article 14 of the African Charter on the Rights and Welfare of the Child. In moving forward, the provision on child labor is also relatively strong. It asks states to provide for minimum ages for child work. It makes a distinction between child work and child labor, obviously, and it provides for a detailed guidance in terms of how this should be addressed. If one looks very closely at the provisions of the Charter that relate to violence against children, it's very clear to say that violence against children, including child marriage, is an issue that is prohibited under the Charter. And of course, this brings me to one final article that I want to flag, which is Article 21. Article 21, as I mentioned earlier, is very solid. It's on protection against harmful social and cultural practices. For instance, in relation to child marriage, it has a specific provision, which is Article 21 sub 2, which says child marriage and the betrothal of girls and boys shall be prohibited, and effective action, not just action, it says effective action, including legislation, shall be taken to specify the minimum age of marriage to be 18 years. If there is any African country that is a state party to the Charter that provided for minimum age of marriage to be below for 18 years, with any exceptions, would obviously be in violation of this provision. And it also even goes further and says that states have the obligation to make registration of all marriages in an official registry compulsory. We do actually take pride in the added value that this provision brings on board. Finally, the committee is established under the Charter. It has the mandate to receive state party reports, to look at individual complaints, but also undertake investigative missions. So far, we have undertaken few investigative missions and received a number of individual complaints. That some of them are concluded, some are still to be concluded. Unfortunately, maybe none of those cases are actually related to child marriage, even though the one against the government of Senegal, for instance, is in relation to harmful practice, which is using children in the form of begging. So we do believe that the individual complaint mechanism itself actually has a very big potential to address the issue of child marriage on the African continent. My 10 minutes is exactly up. I understand that the next speaker on understanding the African Committee, which is a presentation by the Secretariat of the Committee, will be made by Ms. Samrawit Getana. So I want to hand over the floor to Samrawit Getana.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much, Professor Binyam. This is actually Adi. I'm speaking on behalf of Katrin on the presentation of the understanding of the committee. So Professor Binyam has touched upon some of the issues. I'll briefly explain, and then maybe we'll, if there are questions, we'll address those issues later. So the African Committee of Experts on the Rights and Welfare of the Child is a treaty body that is established to actually monitor the implementation of the African Charter on the Rights and Welfare.
Sorry, Adiam, can I come in? Adiam, sorry. You're not here.
According to Article 32 of the Charter. It has 11 members, 11 experts, to protect and train in the has been discussed and promotion minus various activities. The activities or one of the reports.
Adiam, sorry to come in. Adiam, can you hear me? Adiam?
I didn't hear what you said.
Hello? Hello?
Can you hear? Yes. Can you hear me now?
Biniam, can I move to Eric's presentation, then we go back to the Secretariat?
Hi, can everybody hear me?
I think that should be fine. Yeah, we should move to Eric's presentation. And if the connection from the Secretariat once again doesn't work well, then on the committee. Yes. Eric, please go ahead.
Yes, I'm here. Can you hear me? Is the sound clear?
Yes, we can hear you. I can hear you.
Oh, great. Just want to make sure that I confirm this. All right. My name is Eric Guga from Tanzania Children's Forum, as you may all be aware of. And I'm going to present a case study from Tanzania on how CSOs developed and submitted a complementary report to the African Chart Committee of Experts on the Rights and Welfare of the Children. Tanzania Children's Forum, known by its acronym TCRF, together with other partners including Child Marriage Network, we are part of the team that was involved and engaged and coordinated the development of the report, which was constituting the second, third, and fourth state complementary report to the state party report. TCRF are facilitated and organized CSOs to prepare and bring in various information. Maybe just to make you aware that TCRF was established in 2012, so it came in at the right time when the state party was just about to submit its second, third, and fourth complementary report. By that time, until to date, we have about 200 or more civil society. As you know, that civil society comes in and sometimes they disappear or they go. So networking always has to be upgraded, and normally we use the keyword about, not really exact number all the time. Prior to the process of preparation of the report, different partners were involved in supporting financial and technical input. We utilize different experts and different expertise within our network, and even mobilizing financial resources to engage children and other organizations to come on board. And the process started early in 2000. No, that is not exact date, but it doesn't matter. I think the process, when it started, it engaged different stakeholders at the early stage, which included government officials and our members, our partners from Zanzibar side. As you may be aware, the matters of the children are not the matters of the union. So when preparing such reports, in all the international instruments, including the African Committee of Experts, they normally accept one report, though we have two states that have a different statutory mandate in terms of children issues. We are still far ahead before we have a constitutional review, if at all it comes soon, to be able to accommodate the issues of children if we win that, because the process is still going on. We are yet to know the fate. Why we brought in the government in the early process is because in many cases we realize that most of the complementary reports we are prepared in a traditional way where you are becoming critique of the government, which is fine. But sometimes you are sharing wrong information and you don't have confirmation of number of the issues. And so we raise questions, we cross-check facts, and sometimes government has already developed or has advanced some certain initiative, but we may not be aware. So we want to make sure that we understand, and they're also giving us information as much as possible before we start engaging into the internal reporting procedure, finalization and procedure. Okay, just a minute. I cannot move this slide here, so I cannot read. Okay. Anyway, excuse me, I may not follow the slide. I don't know if it's shown there, but I'll just continue reading mine here as much as possible. So the process is about the drafting is done by members. We only have a technical team, and sometimes we get technical individuals to help with the documentation and alignment of the report and compiling and putting the technical language right. But normally it's done with a bigger group, identifying priority issues, analyzing and contextualizing everything. And then the technical team work to draft the report. Then a smaller team of 1 or 2 finalize the fine tune, and then we go back to submit the report and discuss again before we finalize and conclude that this is ready to submit. The key recommendations that arose from the previous report, actually we are mainly focused on policy reforms and amendment of the various acts, including the Marriage Act of 1971, Education Act of 1995, 1978 with the amendment in 1995, re-entry policy on pregnant girls who are in school, resource mobilization and allocation for various child-specific issues, especially the water and sanitation in schools, which is the big issue. Not just water, but also sanitation, quality and accessibility. And then just one thing that I may have to say is that our report came at the time when the government has already submitted theirs. And as opposed to different previous sessions where the other report we've been doing with other mechanisms, the government invited us to their report. And that was an opportunity for us to help them think and try as much as possible to have facts in place, but also for us to understand the gaps and areas that we can utilize to develop our own complementary report when we are working. Because some of the issues the government may not be able to critique themselves. So that was a great opportunity for us to do so. We had a representative to attend the sessions and submitted in the pre-session. And in reality, our report is owned by everyone because of the process of preparation, where we work with the government at certain stage, but also every member is involved, and children are also involved in their own session. They bring their own words and their own information. The only thing we do is we compile and put it in our reports to make sure that they are reflected in submitting. And I understand members of the committee, Chairperson Honorable Benjamin is there, can understand very much on how we dealt with them, and I think they've adopted a very important key recommendations we made. Though there are some shifts which I think some questions will arise from you since the new government came into power. Regardless of the recommendation, we might face some issues. So just briefly, in a nutshell, is that major areas that came up out of the concluded observation was the re-entry policy of pregnant girls, school girls, the issues of supporting children with disability in the education sector, the issues of access, quality and resources availability, and then the issues of marriage acts was the third one, and then the question of harmful practices concerning the FGM and all these other related matters, the early marriage, which is still rampant everywhere at the moment. Actually, it's more obvious now, not that it just increasing, no, because there was no awareness. So now it's becoming more obvious that this is happening every day, and there is so much data that we need to keep on collecting to make it to realize the real situation. Also, the committee recommended and made some specific issues on water and sanitation. I think they really emphasized on that. We had, yeah, those are the generally very specific. Of course, one thing is missing in this presentation, the issue of corporal punishment. That is not highlighted here, but I should mention that is also one of the key area. In reality, what can I say? I have to wait for your questions, but one thing we have learned in the process of preparing the alternative report, the government is not necessarily an enemy or someone that you're going to fight with. So our report, the way we prepared, we make sure that it highlights the gaps and the challenges that the government is facing not to be able to accomplish what it has opted to accomplish. Because CSRF believes that government, it starts with individual people who are parents, also have children, and have specific concern of their children. They wish the same way civil society wish for the children to be. But then how to arrive to that, there might be issues of policy, mechanisms, framework, resource allocation, policy and politics. All these one we try to highlight in our alternative report, in our complementary report, and you can look at it, you can see even the language is really talking that angle and trying to educate and highlight with the committee that those are the issues that the government have to consider and address, because those are what we think are the challenges and gaps that the committee is facing. So this is generally a major lesson apart from all the details that you may be able to see. A successful network is very important that is owned by a member to have a successful report, because I think even with the UNCRC reporting, so the African Charter, I think for the first time we are more or less one bigger network with a fewer reports focused on complementing and comprehensively collecting information from different angles. And we were very happy that even other networks joined together. So what is important is the coordination has to be really specific in terms of mandate and the way it functions. So a strong and vibrant network is very important, and the one that is also forging a relationship with the government. That does not compromise its mandate, but it keeps the good relationship so that you have access to information, but also you complement what the government is. You can understand better when you're talking about the government issues and critique. You talk in a manner where you have more authority because it's a fact and it's more realistic than confrontation. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Eric, for sharing with us the case study from Tanzania on how you engaged, and I definitely do remember some of the details that you actually highlighted now. I am wondering if Sam Rawit from the Secretariat would be in a position, and if the connection would be in our favor, or shall we just go immediately to the presentation by Ruth Koshal on behalf of Girls Not Brides. I think we should go ahead with Ruth's presentation. And we will try, after that we will try if we can get the presentation from the Secretary coming. So Ms. Koshal, you have the floor, please.
Okay, thank you very much, Dr. Biniam. I just wanted to start off by sharing a little bit about what is Girls Not Brides, and then talk about how civil society organizations as well as members of Girls Not Brides can be and have been involved with the committee. So it's a global civil society partnership to end child marriage, and it was founded by the elders and launched in 2011. Currently, there are over 800 members from more than 90 countries, and there's a diverse membership from grassroots to international NGOs working in different sectors as it relates to child marriage, such as education, health, protection. And we have a presence in terms of our members in Africa, Asia, Middle East, the Americas, and Europe. And in terms of our joint mission as a membership, members of Girls Not Brides, the Global Partnership to End Child Marriage, are really committed to ending child marriage and supporting girls who are or have been married all over the world. And this is really in line with the UN Convention on the Rights of the Child. And we believe that 18 should be the minimum age of marriage for boys and girls, which is also stipulated, as Dr. Biniam said, in the African Charter, Article 21.2. In terms of the network, the partnership, specifically Girls Not Brides members work collectively or together to raise awareness of the harmful impact of child marriage at the community, local, and national and international levels, but we also facilitate learning and coordination between organizations working to end child marriage. I can see we have like over 56 participants, for example, in this webinar, and this is also an opportunity to facilitate sharing of experience and learning. We mobilize all policy, financial, and other support to end child marriage. And also this is in line with our new strategy, 2017 to 2020. We will be more effective in achieving our objectives by working together than working alone. And in some of the countries, we have what we call national partnerships in 8 countries. And Lara, who's also on this call, she's the one who is managing the national partnerships as part of the Secretariat. And the national partnerships in the 8 countries include Bangladesh, Ghana, Mozambique, the Netherlands, Nepal, Uganda, UK, and US. But we also work with national coalitions in other countries, which include the Tanzania End Child Marriage Network, of which Eric just mentioned. They collaborated with the Tanzania Child Rights Forum to develop the complementary report, the Zambia Ending Child Marriage NGO Network, and the Zimbabwe Alliance to End Child Marriage. Just to share some statistics, each year, unfortunately, 15 million girls are married before the age of 18. That is 41,000 girls a day. Nearly 10% of the world's population. And this slide just shows you a bit of a breakdown, but 39% are in Sub-Saharan Africa. I won't go through this slide, but it's really interesting to note the rates of child marriage, and which is the prevalence rates and the absolute numbers of child marriage. Quite a number of African countries are in the top 10, such as Niger at 76%, Central African Republic at 68%. In terms of absolute numbers, Nigeria is over 3 million and Ethiopia is almost 2 million. But I invite you to look through this slide in more detail later. And why does this happen? You know, why does child marriage happen? It happens because of gender inequality. And this is also due to poverty and lack of opportunities, insecurity, child marriage in humanitarian context, social and gender norms, and cultural tradition. And the impact of child marriage is very broad, and I think the African Charter clearly stipulates the challenges of child marriage and how it's linked to the different human rights issues. So it's a human rights violation, but also child brides and child mothers have health complications during pregnancy and childbirth. It's a form of violence, which also Biniam talked about, violence against children, physical, sexual, and emotional abuse. And schooling often discontinues with marriage, which is really unfortunate, and we do have some examples here in Africa where this has happened. Poverty traps girls and families into a vicious cycle of generations, and inequality limit future work and decision making. There's still been some advances, so it's not all doom and gloom, but I think that it's good to share some advances. There's a new global and regional commitments, such as the AU campaign to end child marriage, strengthened legal and policy frameworks around especially the African Charter, a movement to end child marriage, new programs, and more funding. And according to, when you look at Agenda 2063 of the African Union, child marriage is included within it. And you also have the SADC model law on eradicating child marriage. So quite a number of countries have national strategies. Again, this is a positive move because it has legal and policy frameworks where they've been strengthened. Examples include Burkina Faso, Chad, Egypt, Eritrea, Ethiopia, Mozambique, Nigeria, Uganda in Africa. And one of the learnings from national initiatives to end child marriage is that really national initiatives need government leadership. And I know Eric talked about working a lot with the government of Tanzania in developing complementary report. And the national initiatives must involve several sectors. And quality national initiatives require involvement of all concerned. And civil society has a key role. Now, just to look at civil society's role in advocating for the ratification and removal of reservations. Biniam talked about this, but there is a role for civil society to advocate for governments to ratify the African Charter. 7 countries yet to ratify include the DRC, Morocco, Sahrawi Arab Democratic Republic, Somalia, Sao Tome and Principe, South Sudan, and Tunisia. And the removal of reservations is really important, and 4 countries have reservations, namely Botswana, Egypt, Mauritania, and Sudan, noting that Egypt and Sudan have specific reservations on Articles 21.2, which deal with child marriage. Civil society organizations, including Girls Not Brides member organizations, can influence their member states to report and implement, and this is a really important role that we can have, to collectively take action to influence their governments to report to the committee, as we heard from Eric and the Tanzania Child Rights Forum, implement and follow up with concluding observations. I think the follow-up with the concluding observations is really key. And especially on Article 21.2 on child marriage, countries can report how they've developed or implemented a national strategy or national plan of action on child marriage. They can also mention the human and financial resources available for the costed national strategy, and also mention child marriage prevalence rates and absolute numbers. Sources would include the DHS and UNICEF State of the World Children. But also it's important to link child marriage with other sectors such as education, health, child protection, and human rights. Again, I won't go through this map, but the committee secretariat produced quite a useful map in terms of a timeline of ratification and reporting, and we can see more and more countries are reporting, which is great. But CSO engagement really is to look at, first of all, civil society needs to have observer status with the committee. They also need to look at the CSO reporting guidelines, because we need to follow those guidelines when reporting, submission of complementary reports, and submit a communication to the committee. Again, Biniam talked about the communication and how it's really an important process that civil society can engage with. I really welcome you to go to the committee's website, which has all these in detail. And then also follow up on reporting and ratification and reservations. I mentioned this earlier, but this map also just goes to show you the countries which have submitted both their initial and periodic reports, countries that have not ratified, countries who have submitted the initial reports only, and countries who have not submitted any reports. So it's unfortunate that some countries do ratify, but they don't submit reports, but some others submit the first report but not periodic. And then the graph also shows the countries which have entered reservations to the Charter. Just mentioning Egypt and Sudan that have reservations on Article 21 on child marriage. And just to conclude, civil society organizations, including Girls Not Bright members, can support, share information, experience, and meet with the following. As you may know, the committee has a special rapporteur on child marriage, who's Mrs. Marie-Christiane Bokoum. But there's also an AU Goodwill Ambassador to End Child Marriage, Mrs. Nyarat Zai, and staff from the AU campaign to end child marriage, especially, and as well as other committee members. For example, Mrs. Marie is currently in Mali doing a mission to Mali, and it's great for civil society to meet with Special Rapporteur Goodwill Ambassador. The Goodwill Ambassador was in Tanzania, I believe, last month, and had the opportunity to also meet with civil society. But civil society can also raise awareness, jointly advocate and take action on addressing child marriage during the Day of the African Child, which we all know is on 16th of June, and also support the dissemination and implementation of the final general comments on child marriage, which is jointly prepared by the committee and the commission. So once this is launched, it's an opportunity for us to also disseminate it. And this last slide just sort of says, so what needs to be done? And this is Girls Not Brides, as we had our 5-year review and report. We said we need to hold governments accountable to their national, regional, and international commitments, develop and implement and fund comprehensive policies, programs, and plans led by the government, continue to grow and strengthen the movement, celebrate and share successes, engage related sectors, and also learn from what works and what doesn't, and increase funding efforts to prevent child marriage and support married girls. So thank you so much for listening, and that's the end of my presentation.
Thank you very much, Ruth Koshal, for the presentation and for some of the work that is being done. In any case, all the presentations that have been made complement each other. What I would like to check, also thank you very much for sticking to the time, both presenters for sticking to the time. What I would like to check now is if our colleagues at the African Committee Secretariats are available, and if the connection is actually on our side. Maybe we can try to see if Ms. Adiam is available to continue with the presentation.
Yes, I'm available now. I hope you can hear me.
It sounds good. I can hear you as opposed to earlier. So go ahead.
Okay. Thank you, Chair. So most of the issues have been touched by Professor Biniam and Ruth. I'll briefly go through the activities that the committee undertakes and the possible avenues through which CSOs can engage with the committee. So the committee is established according to Article 32 of the African Charter on the Rights and Welfare of the Child, and it's mainly established to monitor the implementation of the provisions of the African Charter on the Rights and Welfare of the Child. Mainly it has two mandates, which is the protection mandate and the promotion mandate. And within these two mandates, the committee undertakes various activities. So one of its mandates includes the consideration of state party reports. So once state parties have ratified the charter, they are supposed to submit an initial report after 2 years of the ratification, and then every 3 years afterwards. This allows the committee to actually closely monitor the implementation aspect of the charter in countries that have ratified the charter. So in the state party reporting process, the committee receives state party reports from government, and then it will also invite CSO coalitions within that respective state party to submit a complementary report. It will first consider the complementary report, and then based on the issues that have been raised by the CSO coalitions, it will send list of issues to the respective state parties. And then following that process, the committee will actually undertake a constructive dialogue with state parties, the delegation of the state party during its sessions. And once that process is concluded, the committee will issue concluding observations and recommendations to the state parties, and that is a public document which actually is available on the committee's website and is also disseminated among various stakeholders. So in the state party reporting procedure, one of the issues that is raised is the issue of child marriage, as it is featured in Article 21 of the Charter. The other mandate of the committee is to receive complaint or communication from individuals, including children and representatives of children, on alleged violations of the Charter against state parties. So this is actually one of the added values of the African Charter, as the CRC, the UN CRC, didn't initially have a complaints mechanism. That mechanism is now actually added through the third optional protocol. But for the committee, it has always been the committee's mandate, and it doesn't ask state parties to actually provide additional willingness to be bound by the complaints mechanism. So the committee so far has received 10 communications and has finalized decisions on 5 communications. The most widely disseminated decisions are the communication against the government of Kenya concerning the Nubian children, and then the Senegal decision on the Talibis of Senegal. There are also other communications that the committee is still considering. So this is also another avenue through which CSOs can engage the committee. So we haven't so far received a specific communication against violations on the rights of the girl child, but such violations can be actually brought to the attention of the committee through this complaints mechanism. Another mandate of the committee is to interpret the provisions of the Charter. So it's through this mandate the committee actually adopts general comments. These general comments are so close, but they interpret the provisions of the Charter and provide guidelines through which the specific provision can be implemented in the state party. And it also provides recommendations to various stakeholders, and it's not only limited to state parties. So far the committee has developed a general comment on Article 30, which is on the children of imprisoned caregivers. It has also adopted a general comment on Article 6 on the right to name nationality and birth registration. And it has also developed a joint general comment with the African Commission on Human and People's Rights on child marriage, which my colleague Samrawit will talk about later on. It's also currently developing another general comment on Article 31 on the responsibility of the child, which is one of the peculiar aspects of the Charter. Another activity which the committee undertakes is conducting missions in various countries. So the committee receives requests from CSOs and other stakeholders to actually investigate and undertake missions in selected countries on selected issues, on requested issues. So far the committee undertook missions in South Sudan and Central African Republic on the situation of children in armed conflict, and also in Tanzania on the situation of children with albinism. And the reports of the missions are available on the website. The other activity which the committee undertakes is to conduct research and studies. So according to the mandate of the committee, which is stipulated in the Charter, the committee has a mandate to actually collect and document information in relation to in issues pertaining to children's rights. So in this regard, the committee undertook a continental study on the impact of armed conflict on children last year. The research is finalized and it's available. And currently it's also undertaking another mapping study on children on the move. And any information in that regard will be available when it's there. So that will be from my side. I am done.
Okay, thank you very much, again, for that presentation. It was definitely clear now when you were presenting, so we're very grateful for your patience. Can I now ask Samrawit to come to the floor and say a few words for the coming 10 minutes?
Okay, thank you, Chair. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm sorry. May I proceed, Chair?
Please go ahead. Yeah, we can hear you. Go ahead.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much. I'll be briefly presenting on the joint general comment on ending child marriage. The African Committee of Experts on the Right and Welfare of the Child and the African Commission on Human and People's Rights are currently on the final stage of adopting a joint general comment on ending child marriage. The basis of this general comment is Article 6 sub-B of the Protocol of the African Charter on Human and People's Rights on the rights of women in Africa. This provision provides that the minimum age of marriage for women shall be 18 years. And the other basis for this joint general comment is Article 21 sub-2 of the African Charter on the Rights and Welfare of the Child, which provides that child marriage and betrothal of girls and boys shall be prohibited, and effective action, including legislation, shall be taken to specify the minimum age of marriage to be 18 years and make registration of all marriages in an official registry compulsory. Now, the mandates for coming up with this joint general comment for both organs comes from their respective treaties. Article 42 of the African Children's Charter and also Article 45 sub 1 of the Maputo Protocol both provide that these two organs shall cooperate with other African, international, and regional institutions concerned. So this is where the mandate is derived from. In terms of the purpose and the scope of this general comment, it's the main aim of the general comment is to elaborate on the nature of state party obligation that arises from the two treaties. In terms of that, both Article 6 sub-B and Article 21 sub-2 of the Maputo Protocol and the African Children's Charter provide for general measures that should be taken by states towards implementation of those provisions. What this joint general comment does is it provides for clear steps to be taken. It describes legislative, institutional, and other measures that should be taken by states to give effect to the prohibition of child marriage and to protect those at risk of being affected by child marriage and those that have already been victimized by child marriage. The general comment will give guidance to governments, CSOs, intergovernmental organizations, and in general other practitioners who are working in the area of elimination of child marriage. In addition to that, the joint general comment will be actually adding on the existing protection mechanisms. There are still few issues that are on the process of being finalized, but once those issues are finalized, the joint general comment will be giving guidance in areas of dowry, redress and compensation to victims of child marriage, and reference to various domestic practices. Now, these things are still being refined by the two organs, but once this process is finalized, these issues, especially in terms of redress and compensation to victims and dowry, will be some of the contributions by the joint general comment. The document will have three main elements. It will deal mainly with the underlying principles of interpretation in terms of the aforementioned provisions of the two instruments, the normative framework, and the state obligations. In terms of the underlying principles of interpretation, 5 principles will be used in order to interpret the provisions. That is the best interest of the child, freedom from discrimination, right to survival, development and protection, participation, and the interrelatedness of women's and children's rights. In terms of the best interest of the child, this is one of it's the main principle in interpretation of the Charter. But one thing to be noted is that child marriage gives rise to negative physical, psychological, economic, and social consequences, and it curtails the enjoyment of children's human rights and fundamental freedoms. Therefore, the joint general comment takes a stand in saying that child marriage is not in the best interest of the child, and it also underlines that this principle, the principle of the best interest, cannot and should not be interpreted or used as a justification to permit child marriage under any circumstance. In terms of freedom from discrimination, the general comment will clearly state that state parties should recognize child marriage as one form of sex and gender-based discrimination, and they should take appropriate measures to eliminate it. It also describes the manner in which the act of child marriage overwhelmingly and disproportionately affects girls and women. In terms of participation, Article 4 of the Children's Charter provides that a child has the right to communicate and express their views and opinions, which will be subject to restriction by law. Article 7 also provides that the views of the child must be heard and taken into consideration in all judicial and administrative proceedings. However, it's stressed that a child's right to participate in decisions and matters affecting them shall not be used to justify any exception to the minimum marriageable age of 18 years. This is also in line with the exception that I just stated in the principle of the best interest of the child. Now, the Joint General Comment generally reiterates the interdependence and interrelatedness of human rights, and in line with that, the prohibition of child marriage in Article 6 of the Maputo Protocol and 21 sub 2 of the Children's Charter are interdependent, interlinked with a number of other rights, both in the Charter and in the Protocol. So the normative framework upon which the Joint General Comment is developed includes Article 21 sub 1, 21 sub 2, and Article 1 sub 0 of the African Children's Charter, which deal with harmful social and cultural practices, dignity and growth of the child, and prohibition of marriage and betrothal. And it's provided that the minimum age of marriage is 18 with no exceptions. The other normative framework is based on Article 6 sub A and 6 sub B of the Maputo Protocol, which provide for equal rights in marriage, no marriage without free and full consent of both parties, and minimum age of marriage, also 18 without any exception. And Article 1 sub B of the Maputo Protocol, which provides that state parties should combat all forms of discrimination against women. In terms of state obligations, the General Comment provides for the legislative, institutional, and other measures that should be taken by states. Just briefly looking at the legislative measures, it's stated that prohibition of betrothal and marriage under the age of 18 with no exception should be provided. In this regard, states should enact, amend, and repeal or supplement legislation appropriately in accordance with this obligation. And there should be a provision for personal, full, and free consent to be placed by a consent of, cannot be, I'm sorry. It's stated that personal, full, and free consent cannot be replaced by the consent of a parent or legal guardian or any other person. So this is also one of the legislative measures that should be taken, that should be clarified in national legislation. Additionally, the General Comment suggests the undertaking constitutional reform in cases where that is necessary. In addition to the legislative measures, institutional measures have been further clarified. This include a verification procedure implementation. This is in relation to birth registration, ensuring that birth registration is compulsory, accessible, and free, and age verification. And it's stated that in case of any doubt about the minority of a person, it should be presumed. When there's doubt about the age of the concerned person, it should be assumed that the person is a child, and marriage registration should be compulsory and supported by objective evidence for ascertaining majority, not just hearsay and the like. Aside from that, effective laws and penalties and sanctions should be in place. In respect of that, there should be caution to ensure that penalties do not target or affect children, and the target of penalties and sanctions should be the person who is authorizing the marriage, or who is authorized to perform the marriage, or the person who claims to be authorized to perform the marriage. In this respect, also, it's stated that penalizing parents is not recommended, and also whistleblowers should be protected. In terms of education, there's a lot of stress on retention of children in schools and ensuring equal access to education to boys and girls, using education facilities and schools as an intervention platform for children who are vulnerable to child marriage, and encouraging pregnant girls to continue education after they have given birth, or encouraging victims of child marriage to continue their education. Other institutional measures include, in terms of health services, increasing access and uptake of comprehensive sexual and reproductive health services. This should be done in line with age-appropriate information, of course, and promoting access to justice. In line to that, creating awareness, increasing accessibility of access to justice, and creating specialized children and women justice units, police units should be put in place. And also remedies should be provided by competent authorities. Support should be provided for children who are already married and who are living in a child marriage. This will include social protection, health services, access to redress, education, protection of their other rights that are not directly related to family and reproduction, and supporting in parenting of children who are actually born of this union of child marriage. There should be capacity building to relevant stakeholders in terms of awareing them about the various rights of the child, and in relation to child marriage, about the measures that are to be taken to protect girls who are victims and who are vulnerable to child marriage. And another measure that should be taken is increasing credible and effective aggregated data collection to support various interventions, policies, laws, and programs in ending child marriage, and allocation of budget for the campaign to end child marriage. Other measures include identifying the root cause, or identifying and then addressing the root cause of child marriage, such as poverty, prohibiting and condemning all harmful practices, eradicating systematic gender inequality and discrimination, developing and implementing a multi-sectoral approach and early warning programs, promoting the participation of men, traditional and religious leaders, and developing and implementing specific measures to prevent child marriage among children who are at a higher risk of child marriage, such as children who are affected by conflict and crisis, children with disabilities, displaced and refugee children, and the likes. Another measure is reparation to victims. Now, reparation can take various forms. It can be restitution in terms of returning the child to school if school is interrupted through the child marriage, providing alternative vocational training programs for girls who are pregnant. And another reparation can be rehabilitation and reintegration, that is restoring the independence of the victim and assisting in the physical, mental, cultural, spiritual, and vocational ability, and the full inclusion and participation in society. Additionally, compensation and guarantee of non-repetition should be provided, especially where acts or omissions are attributable or attributed to the state party. There should be compensation provided and guarantee of non-repetition. Another measure that should be taken is awareness creation and public information campaigns to all sectors of the society. Now, after providing for the various measures that should be taken by state parties, the Joint General Comment provides for dissemination, monitoring, and reporting of the document itself. And it provides that the document should be made available in local languages, and its contents must be made known to all stakeholders, especially from government offices, the police, and the judiciary. And in terms of state reporting, as we have seen earlier, both the committee and the African Commission on Human People's Rights undertake the state reporting procedures. And in terms of that, state parties must report on compliance with Article 6 sub-B of the Moscow Protocol and Article 21 of the Children's Charter, in line with the recommendations in this Joint General Comment, which should include statistics and offer descriptions of context, indicate challenges and barriers in realizing the prohibition of child marriage. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Samrawit, for that presentation. So that leaves us, I know we started about 9 minutes late, that leaves us with about 15 minutes, but maybe we might be able to take a bit more than 15 minutes, depending on people's schedules. But I want to open the floor for questions. I understand that the format is we will receive about 5 questions, and then 5 at a time at least, and then we try to provide responses. Am I right? Ruth?
Yes, that's correct. And what we'll do is Lara is just collating the questions and she'll share them. Just as people are about to ask, one that has been already been submitted is, has the committee received any complaints related to the situation in Tanzania where pregnant girls are not allowed in school?
Yeah, so maybe we take that one first?
Sure.
I can say a few words about that. We have not received a complaint as an individual complaint process, but what the committee has actually been looking at that situation very closely. So what we did is, during the African Union Summit in Addis Ababa in July, we engaged with the African Commission on Human and People's Rights, particularly the rapporteur who is responsible for Tanzania. So we have discussed with them about some of the concerns that we have. So ultimately, I can talk about this because it's already in the public domain. It's already posted on the African Commission's website. I understand it's also posted on the African Committee's website. So we have actually sent a communication to an urgent appeal, as it's called, to the government of Tanzania, expressing our concerns about the fact that we are willing to engage with them, that it potentially violates the provisions of the African Charter on the Rights and Welfare of the Child. So the appeal, the urgent appeal, is detailed. As I said, it's available on the website of the African Commission on Human and People's Rights, but also the African Committee. And we are currently engaging with the government on that subject matter, and the government of Tanzania is already aware of that situation. Probably end of this month, the committee and the commission members will get a chance to take stock, as we plan to be in Banjul around the end of October, and that will probably give us an opportunity to engage. Unfortunately, the government of Tanzania was already reviewed by the committee in May, and we had already flagged some of our concerns related to children that are being kicked out of school because of pregnancy and so forth. So the next cycle for engagement to the state party reporting process is quite further down the line. So other avenues will be explored. So that's as far as I could say I can say at this stage.
Thanks. There are 2 other questions, maybe primarily for Eric. The first one is, Can Tanzania share how their experience on engaging children in the process of developing the complementary report? And another question which is similar, how do we engage children effectively in the process at the school and community levels? Also, how to engage child participation at the national level, such as advocacy work and campaigning. And then another one for Samrawit. So 2 for Eric on child participation and 1 for Samrawit. When will the joint general comment on child marriage be published? Any possibilities for CSOs contributing to the drafting? So you can start with those questions.
Yep.
Thank you. So we start with Eric first.
Yeah, thank you very much. With regard to children, I think the best experience is on 3 ways. Both works very well. But one key important thing in preparing children's consultation is to have a clear guidelines that will help some key facilitators and people who are going to consult children on how to run the sessions and how to capture issues and how to help children make a good analysis. And we developed some of those guidelines and early when we were doing with the complementary report on the UNCRC. But secondly, I think it's the one very crucial issue is to have a clear observation of child protection procedures and to ensure that the policies are enforced when you run those consultations, so that children are remaining safe and the participation also becomes very meaningful. We have engaged in 3 ways. One is through civil societies that are in contact with children throughout on their daily work. And they facilitate a group of children and they collect information and share, and we analyze and put them together. But secondly, it is through the National Children's Council. We have a Junior Council of Children. It's called Junior Council of United Republic of Tanzania. It's a Children's Council. It's a Children's Baraza. It's like a children's parliament in our country that is still there. And that council meets on several occasions, and when these kind of mechanisms and procedures arise, we always consult them, and they have their own sessions. They're well experienced, and they normally share some reports. And thirdly is through a national organized forum, which normally you bring children from different angles that have been from different civil society, but also some from the Children's Council. They meet together and then they go through the issues, they pick up the priorities, they analyze, and then they prepare a report which comes to ours. One major challenge has been on how to put that information without distorting the originality. Yeah, you are not, sometimes you are not reading into a verbatim, but you don't lose content. So children with the capacity to understand some of the language of communication like English, yeah, they normally take part in some of our sessions also to make sure that we have not really gone through out of content on that. So that has been the best way. We have not used other mechanisms like video, but those options have been there, the camera and others. But things like drawings that have been interpreted, though we have not submitted any drawings, but we have collected a number of drawings and pictures where children express their views, and we analyze and we present those reports in our submissions. So that's the best I can say.
Thank you, Samrawi.
Thank you, Chair. Actually, the joint general comment has already been adopted, and there will be no more opportunity for engagement of CSOs in terms of the content of the general comment. As you are well aware, CSOs have been very much consulted in the process of adopting the current general comment, and in the upcoming session of the committee in December, which will take place in Sudan, the current draft that we have is going to be discussed, and the way forward will be decided. The way forward in terms of launching the joint general comment along with the African Commission on Human and People's Rights will be decided, and after that it will be launched. There will be CSO engagement and actual engagement of all relevant stakeholders in terms of popularizing the joint general comment. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Ruth, any other comment, questions? Please go ahead.
Yes. Another question is, what are some of the lessons learned in engaging men, traditional leaders, in addressing and ending early child forced marriage? And then another one is from Liberia. I would like my colleague from Tanzania to tell me about challenges they have faced when developing the complementary report. And the other question, is it possible to submit to the committee a single report on the African Charter and on the Maputo Protocol? Maybe that's for you, Binyam. And then for Eric, the Tanzania presenter said that the CSO associated with the state in the first stage of the complementary report. Can you elaborate for transparency issues? Is there not a possibility for the state to influence the civil society work in its favor? And again for Eric, are children with disabilities participating in your engagement? If yes, what strategy do you use to guarantee their participation? And then there's a question on what do we mean by countries having reservations? What does, maybe that's for you, Binyam. So those are the next set of questions.
Okay, thank you very much. Maybe we start with Eric because he seems to have more questions, and then we can continue. Eric, briefly, as we don't have a lot of time, maybe in 1 or 2 minutes. Thank you.
The major challenge, I think, compared to other countries, has been the resources to make sure that we have as many participants as possible in the process. But also, secondly, the fact that Zanzibar has their own mechanisms and the report and their own laws, and ours we have laws. So we're always bringing together children's views and the civil society from both sides has been. But we have been working very well and strategically to ensure that this is not becoming an obstacle. In terms of transparency, I think we have the best example in our country. It's not an issue at all to share information from the government side and us to share with them. The only thing is when the government is not ready to report or to respond to some specific issue, which in turn turns out to be an opportunity for us to submit it. Children with a disability, yes, they have been very much involved and we've been taking care of their different categories. But one thing we want to make sure is that we do not isolate, we do not put specific group of children with disability. Instead, we make an inclusion because there's an ethical dilemma when you put them separately as far as the discrimination might be concerned. So we always arrange facilities to ensure that they participate, including ensuring that the venue is conducive for them to attend, but also we hire or we bring with them specific translators and interpreters and equipment needed to do that. And we've been offered by our members working with disability. And it has not been a big deal. It's not been a big issue per se. We have not really faced a big issue because I think we've been very much aware of that.
Thank you. Samrawit, Adyam, do you want to come on any of the issues, please? Samrawit maybe first and then Adyam next. On any of the questions, if you want, on reservations, maybe lessons learned from men and engagement with religious leaders and so forth. On any of the questions, I will come in last.
Okay, thank you, Chair. Let me first start with the question on reservations. So by reservations, it's meant when a state party enters into a reservation on selected provisions, the implication is that that specific state party will not be bound by the reservations it has made. So that specific country won't be obliged to comply with the provisions in which it has made reservations. I think that is clear. If I can proceed to the question on the possibility of submitting a single report, I'm assuming that the question refers to the possibility of submitting a single complementary report on the Charter and the Maputo Protocol. But as we know, the committee is only mandated to follow up on the implementation of the Charter. So the committee cannot receive any report regarding the Maputo Protocol, and the African Commission is the treaty body that's actually tasked to monitor the Maputo Protocol. So any issues concerning the Maputo Protocol should be raised with that channel. Yeah, but it's possible to make reference to the Maputo Protocol just to support the report. But regarding the Charter, it is possible to submit a single report concerning, for instance, if a CSOs mainly working on the girl child, then it's possible to submit a single complementary report concerning its area of work. That's something as an observer status. So one thing I felt to mention earlier is the possibility of having an observer status before the committee, which can be done in accordance with the guidelines that are available on the website. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Anyone else would like to come? Maybe Ruth, you would like to come on the question in relation to engagement with religious leaders and men. You probably have a few experiences. Girls Not Brides. Go ahead, please.
Okay, thanks, Biniam. So on the engagement of men and boys, we do have some resources on the Girls Not Brides Resource Center. So I would welcome the participant to go to our website and look at that, but also the learning team within the Secretariat is putting together some information and a resource on the engagement of traditional leaders and traditional leaders on addressing child marriage. I just forgot, there was a question here that said, I noticed Nigeria is not among the member states of the Girls Not Brides Partnership. How can a state become a member? So just to clarify, and then also welcome Lara to add to this, maybe the question is the national partnerships. In Nigeria, we currently do not have a national partnership. It's up to the members, the Girls Not Brides members, to come together and decide how they would like to form a national partnership or a group, and usually the Secretariat is in a position to facilitate a process, but we do have a guide which we can also share on how civil society organizations and Girls Not Brides members can come together to form a national partnership. Biniam, is it okay if I just ask Lara to see if she's got anything to add to that response?
Yeah, go ahead, Lara, please. Thank you, Ruth.
Thank you, Ruth. No, I don't have a lot to add. I just wanted to say, if you, as an organization, if you're not a member of Girls Not Brides yet and you want to become a member, you can always visit our website and there's an online application form there. So as an organization, your first step would be to become a member of Girls Not Brides. And if you want to work together with other members working on child marriage in your country, you can also see who are the other members in your country on our website. So you can get in touch with them and see how, if and how you might want to cooperate at national level.
Thank you very much. From my side, maybe I can add a couple more things. It's just to supplement what other colleagues have said. First of all, usually when we talk about child marriage, even though more than 90% are actually girls, we also have to keep at the back of our mind that there are also boys who are married before the age of 18. So that's very important. Now that leads me to supplement the question that is raised in relation to the role of men and so forth. I think it's a similar conversation that we are having on violence against women. In the majority of instances, the perpetrators are actually men. So unless and otherwise you have men come to the party and be part and parcel of the awareness raising and so forth. It's now in some countries, for instance, in countries such as Guinea and so forth, one of the things that has helped is when data was collected, the majority of the women and the girls actually said they practice child marriage, because the men want to marry girls young. When they went and did an interview with the girls, a good number of the men actually said, no, we don't really mind. We can actually get married also by the age 18 or even after 18. In a number of instances, mothers actually or even families allow their children to be married before they turn 18, because for them that's their way of understanding, protecting the best interest of that girl's child. So perceptions and communications and some of these issues are perceived to be taboos and they're not discussed in the open and so forth. Those are some of the issues that obviously will need to be tackled in moving forward on this subject matter, and the role that men play in this regard is extremely important. Which brings me to a related issue, that the issue of child marriage generally also has a power relation issue attached to it. On the continent, we are still living in a continent which is very chauvinist. The relationship between men and women, the relationship between adults and children also manifests itself in a very transparent way when we talk about child marriage. So I think those are issues that need to be taken into account, and our interventions will have to be based on evidence, and that evidence should not come from women and girls only. It should actually come from men as well. Ruth, maybe one other thing in relation to reservations that I want to flag is that as the committee, we're actually trying to engage with states that have entered reservations to withdraw those reservations. In a number of instances, fortunately, the African Charter doesn't have a lot of reservations. It's a very limited number of reservations that states have entered, which Ruth drew our attention to earlier. And we obviously want those states to withdraw those reservations, particularly in the instances those reservations go against the object and purpose of the Charter itself. So, for instance, in relation to Egypt, we're engaging with the government so that it would seriously consider withdrawing its reservations. The same is true to the three other countries that have actually entered reservations. And during the reporting period as well, we asked them to withdraw those reservations that they have entered into the Charter. Ruth, I understand that time is 6 minutes past that, further from what we initially planned. But maybe if I take guidance from you, are we supposed to end here so that I make my final remarks, or shall we take maybe another brief round of 2 or 3 questions if there are any? I'm at your service.
Maybe just one more question, then I will welcome you to do your closing remarks. Can the general comment be used as a structure for a separate complementary report on child marriage, specifically when it has been published? So that's one final question. And how best do you consolidate children in ensuring that state parties comply with commitments they have made? Additionally, how well do children know the complaints mechanisms that are available? So those are the last 2.
Okay, thank you very much for the last 2 questions. Anyone from the Secretariat would like to come in? I will come in finally. Adiam, Samrawit, or any of the other members, particularly in relation to whether the general comment can be used as a structure for submitting complementary reports once it's issued. Anyone would like to come in? Okay, so I take silence to mean nobody wants to come in. So what I can say in that regard is that, look, the general comment is obviously a very elaborate document that gives very detailed guidance on what the responsibility of states is in relation to preventing and addressing child marriages. So the content of the general comment is an interpretation of what is already an obligation, both in the African Charter on the Rights and Welfare of the Child, but also the African Charter on Human and People's Rights and the Women's Protocol. So we're not adding new obligations that states do not have. So I do believe that the contents of what is provided within that joint general comment should be able to inform complementary reports that are provided by civil society organizations. In fact, I do anticipate that some civil society organizations might decide to just submit complementary reports, just only focusing on the issue of child marriage. So I do believe that it has some significant role that it can play in that regard. The second question that Ruth flagged is that how do you make sure that children are actually aware of the individual complaints mechanism? Yes, we usually ask ourselves within the committee, how is it that the process has been there since 1999 and to date only 11 or 12 individual complaints have been received by the committee for the last from 1999 to almost 17, 18 years. So it's not just only awareness by children themselves, but also about by civil society organizations, national human rights institutions, and a whole range of other stakeholders. One of the obligations that the Charter provides is obviously for states and other stakeholders to empower children and all those who work with and for children to know about some of these processes at the regional and international level. Obviously, we don't think the individual complaints mechanism now is going to be a first port of call where every single violation will come to the committee. Absolutely not. What we actually anticipate is that it's in an ideal world, it shouldn't come to the committee. In an ideal world, it should be dealt with by access to justice processes and due procedures that are provided for at the national level by the courts, by the national human rights institutions, and a whole range of other structures that states have put in place at their domestic level. So a lot of awareness raising, and this also relates to the extent to which not just only on the individual complaints mechanism, but also on child rights education. What is the extent to which the formal education system has child rights embedded in it? Is it optional? Is it compulsory? How deep does it go in terms of substance? We do believe that children that are aware of their rights, that are empowered, are obviously the way, the future to make sure that the provisions of the Charter are well respected. I often give the example in Tanzania and Kenya where children who know about their rights against harmful practices, particularly FGM, during the August school holiday season, they refuse to go home because they believe that, and they know that the August season is usually the highest circumcision time. So in a way, they vote with their feet, in part because they've been informed and they're aware. So the whole notion that says nothing about us without us is not just only a mantra from the disability discourse, it should also be a mantra that we should use more often within the child rights discourse. Thank you, Ruth.
Yes, those are all the questions for now.
Okay, thank you very much. So I'm not going to take much time for my final remarks. I think this has actually been a very useful exercise for all that have been involved in it. I really want to thank all the presenters, Adiam from the Secretariat, Samrawi from the Secretariat, but Eric from the Tanzania in relation to the experience that you've had, but of course Ruth also on behalf of Girls Not Pride, but also for convening this webinar. From my side, what I would like to add is the whole child marriage issue on the African continent is not an issue that we can actually continue to park and under the guise of religion, culture, custom, tradition, continue to perpetuate what is happening to our children. In fact, even though there are clear examples of progress in a number of countries, some of the projections for data because of population growth in some instances gives an indication that by the year 2050 we might still be having the same or comparably the same number of child marriages that are taking place on the African continent. So despite the progress that we're making, that's also a very serious cause for concern. So we're not actually talking about doubling efforts in addressing child marriage on the African continent. It's much more about tripling efforts so that we can actually make significant progress in this regard. We do know that the law plays a very significant role, so I think legislative frameworks where they need to be addressed is something that's significant. As was already highlighted, the African Charter provides a very solid platform under Article 21, not just only talking about child marriage, but talking about both boys and girls to start with. Secondly, requiring that the minimum age be set at 18. It doesn't have any exceptions, it says 18. And thirdly, by requiring that all marriages, irrespective of whether they're traditional, religious, and so forth, they are actually registered, and that needs to be made compulsory as far as legislation and enforcement of that legislation is concerned. So that's an extremely important point to take home. The other issue that we also need to keep in mind is that when girls are married, it's not just only a violation of Article 21 of the African Charter. It's a violation of many of the provisions that are there in relation to protection, in relation to violence, in relation to education, health. Some of the girls who fall pregnant and try to give birth, who die in that process. So the whole notion on the African continent that says no mother should die while giving birth is not just only for adult mothers, it's also for, in fact, even more important for girls who give birth below the age of 18, and in a number of instances these girls give birth as a result of child marriage. So those are issues that need to be kept at the back of our mind in our strategies and programs. But I want to also say a few words about the fact that we need to move beyond, as I often call it, the post-child law era, that many of our countries seem to suggest that just because they have legislation, now we are actually making progress. Absolutely not. Legislation is not an end, it's a means to an end. So that whole notion that says legislative, administrative, and other appropriate measures should be taken seriously. It needs to be included in the child strategies that countries are adopting. It needs to be included in the programs that civil society organizations, national human rights institutions, even academic institutions and others, faith-based organizations play a very significant role in this process. And of course, in these plans, strategies, and frameworks and programs, we always have to keep at the back of our mind that the voice of the girl child and the voice of boys in trying to address this is extremely important. And as one of the participants raised the question, the role of men is also extremely important. For instance, October 11, which is being used now, the International Day for the Girl Child, in a number of countries all over the world, for instance, imams have been talking about the fact that girls are extremely important members of the community, and they need to be protected, and they need to be provided platforms. The whole notion that says that you only need to send your girls, you need to keep your boys, you need to send your girls to, you need to keep your boys, you need to send your girls, you need to keep girls at home and only need to send boys to school is obviously not going to help us in more ways than one as far as the Charter is concerned, but it also is not going to help us in relation to achieving the Sustainable Development Goals. And that will probably be my last remark, that the Sustainable Development Goals, if they are indeed to be achieved for all boys and girls, addressing the issue of child marriage needs to be an issue that is taken into account with a very serious attention by all stakeholders, particularly states. My final remark is in relation to the joint general comment, as was already highlighted by our colleagues from the Secretariat. It will see the light of day shortly. It's already been adopted. A couple of cleanings that need to happen to it. We do indeed depend on civil society organizations and all other stakeholders to actually popularize that document, so that it's not just only words on paper, but in fact the intended result that we want to achieve with it is for it to inform law, policy, and planning at the domestic level in state parties to the African Charter on the Rights and Welfare of the Child, but also the African Charter on Human and People's Rights and the Women's Protocol. With those remarks, I just want to say thank you very, very much, and we do indeed look forward to the next webinar.
Thank you as well.
Indeed.
Thank you very much. Thank you, and have a